Hi everyone, this is Mike at Brash Monkey, and in this video I'm going to show you how to create a walking animation similar to this one. And the first thing you're going to need to do is create the character itself in your graphic program of choice, and you have to create it in separate layers, each one being, as you can see here, a separate part of the body that's going to be moving, sort of anything that's going to have a separate joint, so to speak. So you can see we have the forearms separate from the upper arms, separate from the torso and head, and so forth. And I should point out, while you're designing your character, it's very important to keep in mind how the character is going to be jointed, meaning how the limbs overlap, in which order, and making sure that the images are designed. For example, if I move this forearm here, you can see how the upper arm doesn't just stop dead exactly where the forearm begins. There's sort of an area that ends in a rounded tip for the two parts to overlap, so that later on in Spriter, no matter how you rotate them, you're still going to be able to have a nice looking joint where the two parts of the limb meet. And I always like to create the art I'll be using to animate the characters and effects for games larger than I need for several reasons. The first reason being that when you're painting larger than the final size, you can work faster and a little sloppier, because when you reduce the image, like for example in this case I'm working perhaps 4 to 6 times the size that will eventually be needed for a video game, when you reduce it by 50% or a quarter, any of the slight imperfections that are made because you were working fairly quickly disappear. And another reason is that once you get to this point where you're ready to export the separate body part images, depending on your animation style and what you want to do, it might be useful or necessary to rotate the individual body parts so that they're not on an angle, and I'll explain more about this shortly. And any kind of rotation is going to degrade the image a little bit. So if you're working really large, that little bit of degradation won't matter, because you'll rotate it how you need it to be, and then reduce it, so your end result will continue to look very clean. And now to explain and sort of illustrate why I would be going through the extra trouble of rotating the body part images before I export them so that they're not on an angle. Let's look at this character here from the basic platformer art pack, and let's say we were animating a punch animation instead of a walk. In a lot of animating styles, what you're going to want to do is actually exaggerate the reach and therefore exaggerate the movement and the impact of a punch by actually, for a brief moment at the sort of apex of the most important keyframe, is actually stretch the limbs a little bit, as you can see what I did there. Okay, and you can also use similar stretching methods to create a bit of an illusion of foreshortening, as though he's sort of making his forearm look a little farther away from his head, because we've shrunk this upper arm to create the illusion that it's coming outward in perspective. So now that you understand this principle, I'm going to switch over to a blank Spriter project, and I'm going to show you 2 different versions of his thigh image. This is as the image would have been exported right from the graphics program without rotating it. And this has been rotated to be nice and sort of straight across. And the reason is, obviously both of these can be rotated exactly the same, but because this one, the actual image itself, is nice and straight and not at an angle, I can stretch the limb without any distortion beyond the stretching that I want. Whereas if I stretch this limb, the image itself is getting warped, so to speak, right? So you end up with a bit of a weirdness to the image, and the longer or larger the image, and the more severe the angle of rotation built into the image, the more this distortion is going to be obvious. So I've got a real problem here. If I want to make this image that's saved on an angle to match this one, you'll see there's no way I can do it without it getting really fat too. So that's the reason. If you're going to be animating in a manner where you know you are not going to need or want to stretch anything, like stretch any limbs, then you can completely skip this part, and when you're exporting the images, or each body part image, you can certainly export them at the angle that you originally drew them. But so now you understand why I'm taking the extra time, because in all likelihood, just as with the art packs, sometimes I stretch the limbs to create better readability and emphasis for some of the animations. So anyway, if you are going to be stretching any of the images at all, or compressing the entire character at some points, it is important that all of the body part images are straight and are all sort of going the same way. So for example, here's the character as I drew him, but I'm going to, as I'm exporting each part, each body part, I'm going to rotate it counterclockwise and make it nice and straight across. So to do that, for example, I'd take the head image, I'd isolate it over here, and then I would rotate it to about like that, so it looks like he's sort of lying on his back, and then I would export that image, and I would just continue. I'm just going to hide that for now, and I would continue to do that for all of the body parts one at a time, giving them some kind of name that's going to make them very easy to organize and find. Okay, so I have my main Spriter project folder for this new animation I'll be creating. And it's important to remember that Spriter itself does not actually import and save images directly into the Spriter file. So it's really important to keep an organized folder structure. So in this case, I've created a folder here that I just called Gray Guy. And here we have, I made a head folder, and I put the head in it. And as you can see, when I did crop and save the image, I left a little space around, here you can see it here, I left a little space around the head just in case I end up wanting to make any edits to the head image that might make it a little bigger or smaller. I won't have to actually make the image any bigger or smaller after the edit, which will cause it to suddenly shift in alignment. If I suddenly save the image itself larger and I go back into Spriter once I've started animating, then that image will be shifted a little differently and might sort of break my animation, so to speak. So I like to give myself a little bit of room so that any foreseeable edits I'll need to do will fit nicely within the canvas. But I don't want to make a giant amount of wasted space, because that's going to be really inefficient in a game engine. And I have a separate folder for legs, including the pelvis, feet, hands, and so on. And now I'm ready to create my actual Spriter file and start assembling the character in Spriter to animate him. So I'm going to start up Spriter, and I'm going to choose File, New Project, choose OK, and then I'm going to go to that folder that I created called Gray Guy. I'm just going to select it without going inside of it and choose Select Folder. And now what I should see is I have my canvas here ready to go. I have the default entity and animation all ready for me to start animating. And most importantly, in this palette here, this palette window, I have all of the image subfolders I've created, so I have access to the images themselves. So now I'm ready to actually start assembling the character. And before I start dragging the images onto the canvas itself, I'm going to very quickly, for each image, go through and by double-clicking on it with the left mouse button, bring up the default pivot point editor, and I'm going to set a reasonable sort of pivot point for where the image should rotate and scale from. So there's, I just did the torso, now I'm going to do the pelvis, and then the thigh, and the front shin, basically at the knee, back thigh, back shin, and then I don't need to do this angle thigh. That was just there as an example for why I sort of put all of my body parts at a nice flat, non-rotated angle in the images. For the head, it would be sort of the base of the skull where the head would meet the neck, and so on. And then back arm. Okay, now I'm ready to drag the parts out. So I'm just going to start dragging out the parts I need and rotating them to a more appropriate angle. In this case, it's walking, so I'm going to lean them forward a tiny bit. And before you start this, if for any reason you had been moving around on the timeline before, make sure you're at the very beginning of the timeline to create your initial frame that's going to have your fully assembled character. So I'm just going to keep dragging out parts, rotating them appropriately, and assembling the character, something like that. And of course, you can use your original image to as a sort of guide to help yourself assemble a character. So I'm just going to continue dragging out parts. For instance, the head. Something like that. Okay, now I'm almost done assembling the character, but I left out the back arm so that I could show you some of the ways to handle fixing Z order as you assemble a character. And in this case, the back arm, especially if I were creating the actual first walk animation pose, it could be very difficult or clumsy to put the arm where it should be, because the body might be obscuring it. So what you can do is just assemble the arm properly somewhere else, like so, complete with the hand. And then once that's together, you can multi-select the arm. There are several ways to do that. You can click here and then hold Control and click the other parts, and then you can just left click and drag any of the selected parts in order to move it into place. Another way you can do it is to just left click and drag this rectangle selection tool to multi-select things, and then it's the same left click and drag to move something around. And you can select them also in the Z order list, and that also selects them here, and you left click and drag to move them around. So now I'll just move the back arm into place. And then there are several ways I can adjust the Z order of things. I can actually just click and drag on things in the Z order and bring them where I need them to be. For example, I can grab this back arm and bring it down here, just let go, and now it's there. But another way I'm going to undo that. Another simpler way is to, if you left click on something in the canvas and then hold Control and use the up or down arrows, you'll see that it shifts that selected object up or down one rank, so to speak, in that list. But if you use the left and right arrow, you can go all the way to the back very quickly. So the order I should do that, and for this character, is start with the fist, put it all the way to the back, then the forearm, that way it'll be behind that, and then the back arm. And again, you might notice this is not actually any kind of keyframe for a walk. I just needed to make sure that the character was properly assembled. And now that he is properly assembled, I can assign the bones, and once I have the bones assigned, then it'll be very easy to put him into an appropriate initial walking keyframe pose. So to create bones, all we need to do is make sure the Alt key is set to create bone, and then you just hold Alt and click and drag. So I'm going to create my first bone here on the pelvis pointing downward like this, and that's going to be sort of the main bone of the character. And then I'm just going to click and drag, and as you can see, the bones can be anywhere. So this is a child bone of this bone. I can not only create it anywhere, but you can see I can leave it there and it behaves properly. So the bones do not have to actually be attached. I can make sure this parent bone is selected again, and I can create any number of child bones. One second. Any number of child bones to that bone, and you'll see they all work perfectly and adjust themselves based on what you do to the parent bone. Of course, I don't need bones like that, so I'm going to undo. Okay, so now that I have this first parent bone, I'm going to make sure that's selected, hold down the Alt key, and I'm going to create the bone for the torso or chest, and then I'm going to just continue to left click and drag to create a bone for the head. And if it's not in perfect position, all you have to do is move it around and rotate it and tweak it however you see fit. Okay, and the trick is that whatever bone you have selected, if you hold Alt and create a new bone, it's going to be a child of that bone. Okay, so if I need something to be a child of this bone, for instance, the upper arm bones obviously should be a child of the chest or the torso, I make sure that bone is selected, and I hold the Alt key and click and drag, and then that automatically not only creates that bone, but now that bone is selected, which is fairly intuitive since in all likelihood I want to continue with that sort of hierarchy. So now I have the forearm, and then again that's auto-selected so I can create the bone for the hand. And now I need to go back to the chest because I'm creating the bones for the back arm. So as you saw, I created it, and then I just left-clicked and dragged to position it even better. And then I'm just going to do the same thing here, and just reposition that better as I need to. And here, and that's fine. And then I'm going to do the legs the same exact way. I'm going to select the pelvis, since the legs should be a child of the pelvis. And then the lower legs, and then the feet, and I'm going to make them extra long so they're just really easy to grab. And the same exact thing for the back leg. So now I have currently a completely independent but a fully functional sort of skeletal system so that I can animate my my walk cycle. So I'm just going to tweak, now that I moved it, I'm going to tweak everything's position so it makes more sense. Something like that. There we go, that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to start assigning the image sprites to the bones. So all I have to do is select any particular bone I want to with a left click, and then hold the B button, just think B for bone, and then you'll see all of the parts went a little bit semi-transparent, and now all I have to do with the B button held down is left click on any sprite that I want assigned to that bone. And if you mess up, let's say for instance I accidentally click on this foot and now that's assigned to that bone, which is obviously more than a little strange, all I have to do, obviously you could just undo it, but if you sort of see that mistake after the fact and you don't want to undo a million things to undo that, what you can do is just hold B again. You'll see everything that is assigned to that bone is opaque, so you can just left click on that again, and that sort of toggles it. It was assigned and now it's no longer assigned. So all I have to do is select any given bone, hold B, and click on the sprite I want assigned to it. So you can see this goes very quickly. So once you think you have everything, every image assigned to the appropriate bone, one really quick and easy way to test that theory is to just pick the main bone and move it around. That at least tells you that every image is assigned to a bone. And then another good way to test is obviously to just quickly start moving bones around and see if the appropriate things move the way they should. And that's also an excellent time to start double checking your Z order and fix any problem you have in your Z order to make sure that nothing goes behind or in front of something that it should not. And this Z order seems fine for a walking animation, so that's fine. And then the other thing you can do, obviously, now that everything is properly assigned, is start to position your character in a more appropriate place for platformer games or anything humanoid. Typically what I like to do is put this intersection here that represents coordinate 0, 0 of the character right in between the 2 feet, sort of right at where the character's standing. But anyway, another thing you can do to check your parenting hierarchy is to go into the hierarchy list, which should be here on the left side of your screen. Just click the hierarchy tab if it's not visible already. And then not only can you see and rename, you can rename bones by double clicking, like this is the chest bone, so to speak, or torso bone. I already renamed this pelvis bone, but I'm not going to bother renaming all the bones for this demonstration. It's not really necessary. But anyway, not only can you see the hierarchy of things, but you can also just click and drag. For example, if for some reason we wanted the chest torso image to be assigned to the pelvis bone, we can just left click and drag it up in there, and now you can see both the chest and the pelvis are assigned to that bone, but I don't want that, so I'm going to undo. So there we go. Now the character is fully rigged, ready to animate, fully assembled. The Z order has been checked, and I'm ready to start actually moving him into a proper position for the first keyframe. So what I like to do when I start animating a walk animation is to start at my initial keyframe with one of the sort of extreme or most extended frames for a walk cycle. And in this case, I'll choose the part of the animation where the character is sort of at his lowest to the ground with both feet touching, where he's completed the extension of a step. And then obviously if the front leg is going backward, then the front arm should be going forward. And if the back leg is going forward, then the back arm should be going backward, something like this. So once I have that where I like it, there we go, something like this. Once that's all set, I'm going to double check the placement relative to what you could sort of consider the ground here. Because once I start animating, I don't want to have to try to shift the whole character around on every frame. That could get time consuming. One other thing you might notice is that when I drew these feet, I didn't make them straight across at the bottom. I actually gave them a curve. And especially when you're doing cartoony style characters, this is actually a great cheat so that the character, without the need to swap images, a bunch of images for the feet when he's walking, for the toes to bend, creating just a subtle curve to the foot allows you, especially for characters that are going to be fairly small on screen, to get away with animating the entire walk or run cycle without having to do any image swapping. So that's why I drew the feet with a curve. So anyway, you just get that pose to something like that. And of course, this is fairly arbitrary, but it's just easiest for me to think as a sort of starting point at one of the extremes, because we're going to be able to start cleanly at one extreme and then go midway to the next extreme and then loop back to the initial extreme. Okay, now that my first initial keyframe is set up all the way at the beginning of the timeline, what I want to do is start creating some additional keyframes. But before I do that, just to make things really easy for myself, what I'm going to do is change the length of the timeline. And in this case, by default, it's 1000. And I'm just going to go, I happen to know that 782 will give me an evenly divided timeline into 16 segments. So, and I know that when I do a walk or run animation, I do it based on an 8 keyframe animation. So I can basically have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then it loops back to the first one there. So that's what I need. So now I'm ready to go. And that just makes things very easy for me. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the center of the timeline and make sure if you adjust the timeline length that you make sure I can hold control down here and use the middle mouse button to zoom in and out to make sure you can see the whole timeline at once. So you can see sort of the middle of your timeline, and now I'm ready to start animating. So here we have the first keyframe, which is one extreme. So in the middle, by the time we reach the middle of the animation, he needs to be at the other extreme extension. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch the position of the legs. And one other thing I should have mentioned, I just accidentally moved a sprite image instead of a bone. So what you can do is choose Lock Sprites, and now I can't accidentally click on a sprite. I can only select bones, which is much more convenient when animating to avoid the accidental movement of sprites. So now we're extending the front leg forward and adjust its placement relative to the pelvis, something along these lines. And he should have just put his foot on the ground while the other foot is just about to leave the ground. And I'm just going to keep adjusting this until it's where I want it. And back leg, that's about right. And now, of course, we have to also reverse the position of the arms, something like this, and I'm going to swing the shoulders out a little bit as well, something along these lines. So now I can click and drag on the timeline, and we can see we've already got the very beginnings of a walk animation going, obviously very basic right now, and make sure the loop setting is turned on so that the animation loops, and you can see that if I drag past this halfway point, it goes back to the initial keyframe. So already we've got this happening. Now that I have those two extreme keyframes, I'm going to start adding the keyframes in between those two to start to get some up and down movement for the character. I highly recommend when animating a walk or a run for your player character that you don't add any horizontal movement to the head of the character. That should be in place. It shouldn't move to the left or right, only up or down. In my opinion, this gives you the best results once the player character is in the game engine and synchronized with screen scrolling. Okay, in order to move the character up and down, I'm going to be using or manipulating the actual main bone, the pelvis bone. And currently, as you can see, I've dragged up the timeline here so we can see the specific keyframes for each particular object. As you can see, there's currently in the second keyframe, the other extreme, there's currently no timeline, or no, I should say no keyframe for the pelvis. So I don't want to, when I start adding the up and down movement, by adding a keyframe here, I don't want to inadvertently change the position of the pelvis here. So what I'm going to do is just quickly select the pelvis, and because everything else, or almost everything else, has a key, I could use key all, which, as you can see, it just filled in a keyframe for all of those things, and that works for this. I could have also just selected the pelvis itself and chose key selected, and that would have just given me a keyframe for just the pelvis. But for the case of this walk, key all works fine. So anyway, I'm going to scroll back down now with the timeline, since we only need to see the main timeline here. And I'm going to go to the halfway point between the two extremes. And this is the point where the character should be moving upward, because he's sort of extending upward, beginning the sort of falling phase of a step. It's sort of fall catch for walking or running. So I'm going to go, in the case of this character, it's very large and high resolution, so I'm going to go up about 8 pixels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 with the arrow key. So now you'll see he goes up and then back down toward the other extreme, and then we need in between that extreme and looping back to the beginning or the end of the timeline. In other words, we need to move the fill this up again another 8 pixels. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, I gotta select it. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now you'll see as I scrub through here, now we have the up and down movement as well for the character. So I'll play this again, and you'll see it's starting to look more like a walk. We're getting there. So now that we've got the animation looking like this, it's all about tweaking the current keyframes and then adding the last additional keyframes in between these to really sell the walk. So what we're going to do first is use the 1 and 2 keys to go back and forth from keyframe to keyframe. This is really important again because you don't want to just drag like this, because you might think you're on a keyframe and accidentally just be really close to it and then create an additional keyframe right near it. So use the 1 and 2 keys to go back and forth between your keyframes. And we're going to start here and just look at what's happening in the walk. So this is the back leg that's just starting to lift up. So this is the leg that should be up in the air with the knee extended. So I'm going to select this bone, which will make it easier for me to see which bone I want to affect, because here a lot of things are overlapping. Okay, and I want the leg to rise up, and this should actually be bent. Okay, something about like that, and then the foot, he might actually sort of lift his toes a bit for clearance. So now we've got something like this. So he starts here, lifts his foot up, and now he's sort of putting his foot down. It's starting to look better. And then of course, we've got to do the same thing here. Now it's the back leg that should be lifting up. So I'm going to select it here where it's easy to select, and then just press the 2 key to go forward and rotate that leg upward. Bend that knee. Maybe lift this up a little bit. Okay. And now we're getting even closer. Okay, obviously it's a little bit fast, but I'm going to stretch the timeline later to adjust that. I just wanted the nice evenly divided notches to make it really easy for me to space my animation properly. So that's really looking really close. So now it's just a matter of starting to create these frames in between to further perfect. For instance, this foot is angled a bit to the toes pointed to down where it should be flat on the ground. You know, we can just look for things to tweak per frame. I think before he puts the foot down, the leg should be a bit more extended. There we go. And then let's actually, for this part of the keyframe here, we're going to plant the foot a little better and make it like it's already just starting to head back. Okay, there we go. So now there's more of a feeling of really placing that foot down on the ground, and we're just going to do the same exact thing with the back foot. So we're going to extend that a bit more. There we go. And then when he puts the foot down, so I'm using the 1 and 2 keys, and the leg should just be starting to move back again. Make sure the foot is planted well on the ground. And then I've got one other keyframe here that I haven't used yet that I can further use to tweak the animation if I need to. So we're going, just make whatever tweaks you think is necessary. I'm going to adjust this bone a little bit. So I used the 1 key to go back a keyframe, and then I'm going to this part of the timeline without a key yet, and I'm going to adjust this more. There we go. And while you're previewing the animation, you can click on Show Bones, which will hide the bones so you can see what's happening. And you can adjust your playback speed to any speed you want, which is a really nice way to to check the subtleties of the animation. And we're really close now. One last thing that I would definitely do is check the sort of limit, the vertical limit that each of the feet, the front and the back foot, should reach during the walk cycle. Like right now, it feels to me like it's going, the feet are going through the ground as they swing toward the center line. And eventually Spriter will have the ability to sort of drag rulers, sort of guidelines that'll be able to help you make sure that things stay on a given level or something like that. But in the meantime, a very easy trick to do something like that is simply use the middle mouse button and drag down. For example, if we were doing this front foot to something like this, let's pause it, go to any given keyframe, you can rotate that a bit and do something like this so that it's not beyond the limit, and there, that's good. And then the leg is coming up again, so that should be fine, but we can adjust it however we think is necessary. There we go, and then just go do that for all keyframes. All right, here's the front leg lifting up. It should be higher now, so you just adjust as needed. There we go. So now the front foot is pretty good. There we go. And I would just do the same thing with the back leg. There we go. So now the walk seems to be, the feet don't go through the ground as he walks. And that's it. I'll hide the bones again. And actually, I forgot one thing. I have my playback speed set at 58%. So once you get the walk where you like it by tweaking these keyframes, we'll bring this back to 100%. And then I'm going to click in here on the timeline, and instead of 782, we're going to bring it up to something like 1200. Make sure stretch keys is applied or is checked, and then click apply length. And I'm going to click in here on the timeline and then hold control and scroll so that I get the whole timeline in there. And now when I play back at 100% speed, it's a fairly appropriate speed. So that's it. I could make some more tweaks, but that's not too bad, and hopefully it gets the idea across. And that's it. That's how to animate a walk cycle in Spriter. Thanks very much for watching.